You probably think you know history, the great kings, the mighty empires, the dynasties that shaped our world. Charlemagne, William the Conqueror, Richard the Lionheart, names carved into stone and textbooks, impossible to forget. But here's what they don't tell you. For every king you've heard of, 10 more ruled just as powerfully, commanded just as fiercely, and then vanished so completely that even their bones went missing. Not defeated, not merely forgotten, but actively erased. Scrubbed from records, buried in unmarked graves, their bloodlines snuffed out like candle flames in a sudden wind. Tonight, we're descending into those shadows. We're walking through throne rooms that crumbled into dust, tracing bloodlines that ended in monastery cells and midnight executions. We're going to meet kings who terrified emperors, queens who commanded armies, dynasties that lasted centuries, and then, for reasons as brutal as they are fascinating, disappeared so thoroughly that most people have never even heard their names whispered. This isn't the history they taught you. This is what happens when the winners decide who gets remembered. And if you find this journey interesting, go ahead and like the video, subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, and drop your city and the current time in the comments. I love knowing who's up late exploring history with me. Now settle in, dim the lights, let the world fade, and join me as we step into the forgotten courts of kings who ruled in shadows. It starts in a palace that doesn't exist anymore, somewhere in what's now northern France. In the fading light of the 8th century, sits a king who knows he's powerless. His name is Childeric III, and he's the last of the Merovingians, a dynasty that once terrified Rome itself. His ancestors wore their hair long as a symbol of divine right, led armies across Gaul, minted coins with their faces stamped in gold. They were warrior kings, blood-soaked and legendary. But Childeric? Childeric has no army, no real authority, not even a sword at his side that anyone would fear. He sits on a throne, yes, but it's theatre, pure ceremony. The man with actual power, the one making decisions, signing treaties, commanding troops, his name is Pepin. Not King Pepin, not yet. Just Pepin the Short, mayor of the palace. A title that sounds administrative and boring until you realize the mayors have been running the kingdom for generations, while the Merovingian kings withered into ghosts. The Merovingians didn't fall in a single battle or dramatic coup. They decayed, slowly, agonizingly, like watching a tree die from the roots up. It began in the 7th century when the dynasty fractured into internal wars, brother against brother, queen against queen, assassinations in the dark. Real power drifted into the hands of the mayors, men who controlled the finances, the armies, the alliances. The kings became puppets, trotted out for ceremonies and official documents. But everyone knew the truth. The mayor decided everything. And generation after generation, the Merovingian kings grew weaker, their bloodlines tangled and thin, their authority a polite fiction maintained by men who had no reason to overthrow them because they already had all the power. Until Pepin decided the fiction had gone on long enough. In 751, he made his move. Not with swords, though he had those. Not with riots or rebellions, though he could have arranged them. Pepin was smarter than that. He went to the Pope, asked a simple question. Who should be king? The man with the title, or the man with the power? The Pope, understanding the game perfectly, gave the answer Pepin wanted. The man with power, obviously. And just like that, Pepin was crowned King of the Franks. Childeric III, last of the Merovingians, was given a haircut, not a trim, a tonsure, the forced shaving of the head that marked monks and prisoners. It was symbolic violence, stripping away the long hair that represented Merovingian divine right. Then Childeric was shipped off to a monastery. Not killed, not publicly executed, just removed. Locked away in some distant abbey where he could pray and rot in obscurity. He died there, probably in 754, though no one bothered recording the exact date. No tomb was marked, no coins minted, no chronicles written about his passing. The last king of a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years just stopped existing, and the world moved on without noticing. But here's where it gets darker. Pepin didn't stop with Childeric. He went after the entire Merovingian bloodline. Sons were found and placed in monasteries. Daughters married off to obscure nobles far from power. Anyone with a legitimate claim to the throne was quietly, methodically erased from public life. Some were exiled to Italy or beyond the Pyrenees. Others simply vanished from the records entirely. Their fates unknown but easy to guess. The Carolingians, Pepin's dynasty, needed the Merovingians gone. Not just defeated, gone. Historians debate how brutal the purge was. Some claim it was relatively bloodless, that most Merovingians lived out their days in comfortable irrelevance. Others point to the suspicious silence in the records, the sudden disappearance of entire family branches, and suspect something far more violent happened behind closed doors. What's certain is that within a generation, the Merovingians were a ghost story. Children growing up in Frankish lands heard legends of the long-haired kings, but those legends were vague, confused, half-remembered. The Carolingians commissioned chronicles that painted the Merovingians as weak, decadent, failures who deserved their fate. And slowly, that became the official truth. Even their tombs were forgotten. The Merovingians had been buried with treasures, weapons, jewelry, all the trappings of kingship. But as the centuries passed, those graves were looted, built over, lost. Archaeologists have spent decades trying to locate Merovingian royal burials, and they've found scraps, fragments, nothing conclusive. Childeric III's resting place? Unknown. Completely unknown. The last king of a mighty dynasty has no marked grave, no monument, no place where you can stand and remember that he existed. It's as if the earth itself swallowed him whole. And that's the first lesson in how kings get erased. You don't need to kill them dramatically. You don't need pyres or public executions. You just need patience, control of the narrative, and the willingness to let time do the work. Within 50 years, the Merovingians were barely a memory. Within 100, they were myth. And today, if you ask the average person about French kings, they'll name Charlemagne, maybe Louis XIV, Childeric III. Never heard of him. The Merovingian dynasty ruled longer than the United States has existed, and almost no one knows they're gone. But if the Merovingians faded through manipulation and monasteries, the Burgundians had it worse, much worse. They were crushed, annihilated, erased not through political maneuvering, but through raw, overwhelming force, and the man who did it made sure they'd never come back. The kingdom of Burgundy sits wedged between two empires in the early 6th century. To the west, the Franks. To the east, the Ostrogoths. And caught in the middle, desperately trying to survive, is King Gundobad. He's not a weak king, not incompetent. He's actually quite clever, playing the Franks and Ostrogoths against each other, signing treaties, arranging marriages, doing everything a small kingdom's ruler should do to avoid being swallowed whole. But cleverness only gets you so far when you're surrounded by wolves. Gundobad knows his kingdom is doomed. He can feel it in the shifting alliances, the way Frankish envoys smile too broadly when discussing borders. The Burgundians have wealth, fertile lands, control over key mountain passes. The Franks want all of it, and what the Franks want, they take. So Gundobad tries marriage diplomacy. He arranges for his niece, a Burgundian princess, to marry a Frankish king. It's supposed to secure peace, create family ties that make war unthinkable. It doesn't work. The Frankish king, Clovis, smiles and accepts the bride, and then immediately starts preparing for war. Because to Clovis, marriage isn't peace. It's just another weapon. When Gundobad dies in 516, his son Sigismund takes the throne. Sigismund is a different kind of king. More pious, more Catholic, more concerned with churches than armies. He builds monasteries, donates land to bishops, writes letters to the Pope. He thinks devotion will protect him. It doesn't. In 523, the Franks invade. Not with a pretext or declaration. They just come, two massive armies converging on Burgundy from the north and west. Sigismund tries to fight, tries to rally his nobles, but Burgundy is small and exhausted. The Frankish forces tear through his defences like they're made of paper. Sigismund flees. He doesn't go to another kingdom or fortress. He runs to a monastery, the same strategy Childeric would later use. Except Sigismund doesn't get to live out his days in prayer. The Franks find him, they drag him out, and then, to send a message that no one will ever forget, they execute him and his entire family, wife, children, advisors, all of them, thrown into a well, alive. The well is then filled in with stones and earth, burying them in darkness. It's not just murder, it's erasure, making sure no one can even retrieve the bodies for a proper burial. The Franks don't stop there. They march through Burgundy, systematically destroying everything that represents Burgundian identity. Royal palaces are burned, treasuries looted, noble families scattered or absorbed into Frankish aristocracy. The Burgundian language, a distinct dialect that had evolved over centuries, is actively suppressed. Frankish becomes the language of power, of law, of survival. Within 2 generations, Burgundian as a spoken tongue is gone, completely gone. Linguists have tried to reconstruct it from fragments in place names and old documents, but it's impossible. Too much was lost. The Burgundian legal code, a sophisticated system of laws that had governed the kingdom, is replaced with Frankish law. Burgundian coinage stops being minted. Burgundian military traditions vanish. Even the royal burial sites are destroyed or built over. The Franks are so thorough that later historians struggle to piece together basic facts about Burgundian kingship. How many kings were there? What were their accomplishments? What did their courts look like? The answers are partial at best, guesses at worst. Because the Franks didn't just conquer Burgundy, they deleted it. And here's the cruelest twist. Burgundy becomes the name of a wine region, a pleasant, rolling landscape known for vineyards and tourism. Ask someone today about Burgundy and they'll talk about Pinot Noir and cheese, maybe medieval villages. But the Kingdom of Burgundy, the kings who ruled it, Gundobad, Sigismund, the entire dynasty, they draw blanks. The Franks won so completely that they even stole the name. Burgundy, the kingdom, became Burgundy. The French province became Burgundy the wine brand. The erasure was total. Archaeologists occasionally find traces. A coin here, a fragment of jewellery there. In 2011, workers renovating a church in eastern France discovered a stone slab with Burgundian inscriptions. It caused brief excitement in academic circles. Finally, something tangible from the lost kingdom. But the public didn't care. It was a curiosity, a footnote, because that's what the Burgundians have become. A footnote in the story of Frankish expansion. And most textbooks don't even give them that. They're just part of the tribes conquered by the Franks, lumped together with a dozen other forgotten peoples. But if the Burgundians were crushed by external force, the Kingdom of Navarre destroyed itself from the inside, slowly, painfully, with so much dysfunction that watching it collapse was like watching a train wreck in extreme slow motion. And the engineer driving the train off the cliff, a king so spectacularly terrible, so magnificent in his failures, that he earned the nickname Charles the Bad. Not Charles the Unfortunate or Charles the Unlucky, Charles the Bad, because his own people hated him that much. Navarre is tiny, a postage stamp kingdom in the Pyrenees, squeezed between France and Aragon, surviving on mountain passes and stubbornness. It shouldn't exist at all, but it does, through careful diplomacy and taking advantage of larger kingdoms being distracted by each other, until Charles II becomes king in 1349. Charles is ambitious, wildly, unreasonably ambitious. He wants to be more than just King of Navarre. He wants French territory, Aragonese lands, maybe even a shot at the French throne itself. He schemes constantly, makes alliances and breaks them just as fast, plays nobles against each other, poisons rivals, allegedly, though the allegations come from everyone, and generally makes himself the most untrustworthy king in Europe. His greatest scheme involves the French succession. Through some complicated genealogical claims, Charles believes he has a better right to the French throne than the current king. Never mind that France is 100 times larger and more powerful than Navarre. Never mind that starting a civil war would be insane. Charles is convinced he can win through clever maneuvering. So he plots. He bribes French nobles. He arranges assassinations, including the murder of the Constable of France, stabbed to death at a dinner party Charles himself arranged. It's brazen, reckless, and it makes every neighbouring kingdom realize Charles the Bad is dangerous. The French king, Charles V, because medieval Europe loved confusing everybody by naming multiple kings Charles, has had enough. He invites Charles of Navarre to a feast. It's obviously a trap. Everyone knows it's a trap. But Charles the Bad shows up anyway, probably because he thinks he's too clever to be caught. He's wrong. Halfway through the meal, French soldiers burst in, arrest Charles, and drag him off to prison. He spends the next year locked in a tower, and Navarre is left without a king, teetering on the edge of being absorbed by France or Aragon. But Charles survives. He escapes, or is released, the records conflict, and returns to Navarre to plot his revenge. Except now, no one trusts him. His own nobles are exhausted by his schemes. His people are tired of wars that benefit no one but Charles's ego. And neighbouring kingdoms have learned that the only way to deal with Charles the Bad is to wait for him to self-destruct, which he does, spectacularly. The end comes in 1387, and it's either medical malpractice or the universe's sense of irony. Charles is old now, in his 50s, suffering from an illness no one can diagnose. His doctors try everything: bleeding, herbs, prayers. Nothing works. Finally, they decide on a dramatic treatment. They're going to wrap him in linen cloths soaked in brandy, creating a sort of alcohol cocoon that's supposed to draw out toxins through the skin. It's medieval medicine at its finest, which means it's terrifying and makes no sense. The servants wrap Charles tightly, head to toe, until he looks like a mummy. Then they're supposed to stitch the cloths closed to keep the brandy from evaporating. But the maid doing the stitching makes a mistake. She's working by candlelight, and at some point, she gets too close with the needle and accidentally sets the brandy-soaked cloth on fire. Charles the Bad, King of Navarre, wrapped in alcohol-soaked bandages, becomes a human torch. He burns alive before anyone can unwrap him. The fire is too hot, too fast. He screams, of course. The whole palace hears him screaming. But by the time they get the flames out, Charles is dead, cooked inside his own medical treatment. His son inherits what's left of Navarre, which isn't much. A tiny kingdom with no money, no allies, and a reputation for producing terrible kings. Over the next century, Navarre gets carved up piece by piece. The French take the northern half. Aragon takes the southern half. By 1512, Navarre as an independent kingdom no longer exists. It's absorbed, divided, its royal line scattered into noble families with fancy titles but no real power. And Charles the Bad, he's remembered, barely, as a footnote. A cautionary tale about ambition. Most people don't even know he existed. The kingdom he ruined, also forgotten. Just another small realm that couldn't survive the Middle Ages. But Navarre at least had a slow death. The Visigoths, they vanished overnight. One battle. That's all it took to erase 300 years of rule. One single catastrophic afternoon, and the most powerful kingdom in Spain was gone. It happens in 711, near the Guadalete River, though historians aren't even sure of the exact location, because the Visigoths lost so completely that even the battlefield was forgotten. King Roderick, the last Visigothic king, faces an invading Muslim army led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. Roderick has numbers. Maybe. The chronicles say he has 100,000 men, though that's probably exaggerated. What's certain is that he has the Visigothic nobility, the warriors who've defended Spain for generations, the heavy cavalry that once made Gothic armies feared across Europe. It doesn't matter. The battle is a massacre. Roderick's army disintegrates. Some sources claim treachery, that Gothic nobles betrayed Roderick because they hated him for taking the throne through a coup. Others say the Muslim forces simply outmaneuvered the Visigoths, using tactics the Gothic army wasn't prepared for. What everyone agrees on is that by the time the sun sets, the Visigothic army is shattered, thousands dead, the rest fleeing in panic. And Roderick, he disappears. His body is never found. Some chronicles claim he drowned crossing a river. Others say he was killed in the fighting, but his corpse was never identified. A few whisper that he escaped, fled into the mountains, lived out his days as a hermit. Nobody knows. The last king of the Visigoths is a mystery, even in death. The Muslim conquest that follows is breathtakingly fast. Within a decade, almost all of the Iberian Peninsula is under Islamic control. Visigothic cities surrender or are taken. The Gothic nobility either converts, flees north to the Christian kingdoms forming in Asturias, or is wiped out. Visigothic laws, language, culture, they evaporate. The Muslims bring their own legal codes, their own architecture, their own way of life. And the Visigoths, who had ruled Spain longer than the United States has existed, become ghosts. Here's what makes it worse. The Visigoths have no real records of their own. They weren't big on writing things down, or if they were, those writings didn't survive. What we know about Visigothic Spain comes mostly from a few chronicles written by monks, and those chronicles are sparse, contradictory, sometimes obviously wrong. We don't know what the Visigothic royal court looked like. We don't know how they organized their government in detail. We don't even know how many kings they had. Lists of Visigothic monarchs exist, but they conflict. Some include kings other lists don't mention. Some skip entire dynasties. The archaeological record is just as frustrating. Visigothic artifacts exist, sure. Jewelry, weapons, a few fragments of buildings. But where are the palaces, the great halls, the royal tombs, the crown jewels? Gone, scattered, looted over centuries. The most famous Visigothic treasure, the treasure of Guarazar, was discovered by accident in 1858 by a farmer digging in a field. Gold crowns, crosses studded with jewels, inscriptions naming kings. It's stunning, but it was buried, hidden, possibly by Gothic nobles fleeing the Muslim conquest, intending to come back for it and never returning. Or maybe it was a royal burial that got looted and reburied. No one knows. And here's the most maddening part. Visigothic Spain was literate, educated. They had bishops writing theological treatises, judges writing legal texts. Isidore of Seville, a Visigothic scholar, wrote the Etymologiae, an encyclopedia that was used across Europe for centuries. The Visigoths weren't barbarians. They had a sophisticated culture. But when that culture collapsed, so much of it just vanished. Libraries burned, documents destroyed, knowledge lost. Modern Spain barely acknowledges the Visigoths. Spanish history jumps from the Romans to the Muslim conquest to the Reconquista. The 300 years of Visigothic rule. A blank spot, a historical amnesia that's never really been filled in. If you go to Toledo, the old Visigothic capital, there are almost no Visigothic buildings left. The city is full of Muslim architecture, medieval, Christian churches, Renaissance palaces. But Visigothic, you have to hunt for scraps. A few carved stones reused in later buildings. Some foundations buried underground. That's it. The capital of the Visigothic kingdom has been built over so many times that the kingdom itself is invisible. And King Roderick, the man who lost it all in a single day, he has no tomb, no monument, no plaque. He's a name in a chronicle that most people will never read. The last king of a vanished kingdom, forgotten in the kingdom he lost. But while the Visigoths collapsed in one dramatic battle, the Lombards faded through something quieter, more political. They got conquered, sure, but not through overwhelming force. The Lombards were defeated by a wedding, a siege, and a piece of religious jewelry that outlasted the kingdom itself. It starts with King Desiderius, ruling Lombardy in the late 8th century. The Lombards control most of Italy, have for 200 years. They're rich, powerful, constantly feuding with the Pope, but also essential to Italian politics. Desiderius is clever. He understands that the real threat isn't the Byzantines in the south or the Italian city-states. It's the Franks, always the Franks. So he does what medieval kings do when they're worried. He arranges a marriage. His daughter marries Charlemagne, the Frankish king, who's already conquered half of Europe and shows no signs of slowing down. For a moment, it works. Charlemagne and Desiderius are family now, allied through blood. But then Charlemagne divorces Desiderius's daughter. Not for political reasons, not because she did anything wrong. He just wants a different wife. He sends her back to Lombardy, humiliated and rejected. It's an insult Desiderius can't ignore. He retaliates by supporting a Frankish rebellion, trying to destabilize Charlemagne's kingdom from within. Bad idea. Charlemagne doesn't forgive insults. He invades Italy in 773, bringing an army so large that Italian chroniclers describe it as a flood, an unstoppable wave crashing into Lombardy. Desiderius retreats to Pavia, his capital, and prepares for a siege. Pavia is strong, well fortified, supplied for a long siege. Desiderius thinks he can outlast the Franks, wait for winter or disease or rebellions to pull Charlemagne away. He's wrong. Charlemagne settles in for the siege, and he's patient. Months pass. Pavia holds. But slowly, inevitably, supplies run low. Morale crumbles. The Lombard nobility starts to wonder if it's worth fighting for a king who started a war they can't win. In 774, after nearly a year of siege, Pavia surrenders. Desiderius is taken prisoner. He's not executed, not put on trial. Charlemagne doesn't need to. He just ships Desiderius off to a monastery in France, far from Italy, where the former king can spend the rest of his days praying and remembering what it felt like to have power. Desiderius dies there, forgotten, probably in the 780s. No one bothered recording the exact year. And with Desiderius gone, the kingdom of the Lombards dies too. Charlemagne doesn't install a puppet king or set up a regency. He just takes the iron crown of Lombardy, the symbol of Lombard kingship, and crowns himself king of the Lombards. It's not even a separate title in his mind. He's already king of the Franks. King of Italy is just another crown to collect. The Lombard nobility is absorbed into the Frankish aristocracy. Lombard laws are replaced with Frankish codes. The Lombard identity, distinct for centuries, is slowly erased. Within a generation, Lombard is just a regional term, a vague memory of people who used to rule here before the Franks. But the Iron Crown survives. It's a remarkable object, supposedly containing a nail from the true cross, forged into a thin band inside the gold crown. For 1,000 years, it's used to crown Holy Roman emperors, the emperors of Austria. Even Napoleon crowns himself with it in 1805. But here's the dark irony. The crown outlasts the kingdom by centuries. It's venerated, studied, kept in a cathedral in Monza, where tourists can still see it today. The Lombard Kingdom, forgotten. The kings who wore it, unknown. If you ask someone about Lombard history, they'll probably mention Lombard architecture or Lombard banking families from the Renaissance. The actual Lombard Kingdom, the 200 years of rule, the dynasty of kings. Blank stares. The crown is famous. The kingdom it represented is gone, and archaeologists have struggled to find Lombard royal sites. There should be palaces, tombs, treasure hoards. There are fragments, scraps, enough to prove the Lombards existed, but the grand palaces where Desiderius held court, destroyed or built over. The royal tombs, looted or lost. In 2013, Italian archaeologists thought they'd found the grave of a Lombard king near Pavia. They excavated carefully, found rich grave goods, a skeleton buried with honours. DNA testing revealed it was probably a nobleman, maybe even royalty. But which king? Impossible to say. The grave had no inscriptions, no identifying markers. It could be anyone. The Lombard kings are so thoroughly forgotten that even when we find their bones, we can't put a name to them. But if the Lombards faded through conquest and cultural absorption, the Saxons were drowned in blood. There's no other way to describe it. The destruction of Saxon kingship is one of the most brutal episodes in medieval history, and it's been sanitized, downplayed, erased from popular memory, because the man who did it is Charlemagne. The same Charlemagne celebrated as the father of Europe, the great Christian emperor. But to the Saxons, Charlemagne is a monster, a genocidal conqueror who destroyed their religion, their culture, and their independence in a campaign that lasted decades and killed thousands. It starts in the 770s. The Saxons live in what's now northern Germany, organized into tribes, ruled by chiefs and warrior leaders who resist Frankish expansion. There, pagans, worshipping gods whose names are now mostly forgotten, and they're stubborn. For 30 years, Charlemagne wages war against them. Not a single campaign, not one big battle. 30 years of brutal, grinding warfare. Villages burned, crops destroyed, Saxons forced to convert at sword point. And when they rebel, which they do repeatedly, Charlemagne's response is overwhelming violence. The worst comes in 782. A Saxon leader named Widukind has been leading the resistance, raiding Frankish settlements, ambushing armies, refusing to submit. Charlemagne finally corners Widukind's forces near the Aller River. The battle is savage. Hundreds of Saxons are killed. And when the fighting ends, Charlemagne orders the survivors rounded up. Not the warriors, everyone. Women, children, elders. He demands they convert to Christianity, swear loyalty to Frankish rule. Those who refuse are separated out, 4,500 people, maybe more. The chronicles vary, and in a single day, at a place called Verden, all of them are executed, beheaded, every single one. The massacre is so extreme that even Frankish chroniclers are uncomfortable describing it. But Charlemagne doesn't apologize. He issues a decree, the Capitulatio de Partibus Saxoniae, that makes Saxon paganism punishable by death, worshipping the old gods, execution, refusing baptism, execution, even eating meat during Lent, execution. He's not trying to convert the Saxons, he's trying to erase them. Widukind survives the massacre. He's not caught at Verden, but he watches his people being destroyed, tribe by tribe, and finally, in 785, he surrenders. He agrees to be baptized, with Charlemagne himself standing as his godfather. It's propaganda theatre, showing the Saxons that even their greatest leader has submitted. But Widukind's baptism doesn't end Saxon resistance. It just goes underground. For another 2 decades, Saxon rebels fight on, and Charlemagne's response is always the same: mass executions, forced deportations. Entire tribes relocated to other parts of the Frankish Empire, scattered so they can never organize again. By 804, Saxon independence is over. Not negotiated away, not absorbed through diplomacy, destroyed. The Saxon tribal structure is dismantled. Saxon chiefs who survive are turned into Frankish vassals, given Christian names, forced to dress and act like Franks. The old Saxon gods are forgotten, their temples torn down, their rituals banned. Within 2 generations, Saxon paganism is almost entirely gone. What little survives exists in fragments, half-remembered myths that Christian monks wrote down and Christianized. We don't even know the names of all the Saxon gods. They were that thoroughly erased. And Saxon kingship, it never existed officially. The Saxons didn't have kings in the formal sense, just war leaders and chiefs. But those leaders had power, commanded loyalty, ruled their territories. Charlemagne made sure none of that survived. The Saxon lands became part of Francia, divided into counties administered by Frankish nobles. The Saxon language survived, barely, evolving into what would eventually become Low German. But Saxon political identity, gone. Ask a modern German about Saxon kings, and they'll probably think you mean the much later Duchy of Saxony, which is a completely different entity. The original Saxons, the pagan tribes who fought Charlemagne for 30 years, forgotten. The massacre of Verden, barely mentioned in textbooks. Widukind, a footnote, if he's mentioned at all. And here's the darkest part. Charlemagne is celebrated for civilizing the Saxons, bringing them Christianity and rule of law. The violence is downplayed as necessary, unfortunate but justified. But the Saxons didn't see it that way. They saw their world ending, their gods forbidden, their leaders executed or forced into submission, their children raised as Franks, taught to hate the old ways. It wasn't civilization, it was cultural annihilation, and it worked. The Saxons were erased so completely that even their memory became a tool of Frankish propaganda. They exist in history as the pagans who needed to be saved, the barbarians who were tamed, not as people with their own culture, their own beliefs, their own right to exist. But while Charlemagne was destroying the Saxons, another kingdom was collapsing on the edges of England, a place so thoroughly erased that most people don't even realize it existed, the kingdom of East Anglia, You've probably heard of Wessex, maybe Mercia. But East Anglia, it's a blank spot in English history, despite ruling a significant chunk of what's now Norfolk and Suffolk for centuries. And the king who represents its end is Edmund, Saint Edmund the Martyr. Except the martyr part is propaganda, and the truth is messier and more brutal than the legends suggest. East Anglia in the 9th century is prosperous. Farmland, trade routes, monasteries stuffed with silver and manuscripts. It's a tempting target. And in 865, the target becomes irresistible when the great heathen army arrives. That's what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls them. The great heathen army. A massive Viking force, not raiders but conquerors, here to take kingdoms, not just loot. They sweep through England systematically, crushing Northumbria, conquering Mercia. And in 869, they come for East Anglia. King Edmund tries to fight. The records are sparse, contradictory. Some say there was a battle. Others claim Edmund was betrayed, captured before he could assemble his forces. What everyone agrees on is that Edmund is taken prisoner by the Viking leaders, Ivar the Boneless and his brothers. And what happens next becomes legend, though the legend is almost certainly wrong. The tale says Edmund refuses to renounce his Christian faith, refuses to submit to pagan rule. So the Vikings tie him to a tree and use him for archery practice. Shot full of arrows, like St. Sebastian, then beheaded when he still won't submit. His head is thrown into the woods, guarded by a wolf until Christians find it and bury it with full honours. It's a great story, inspirational, the kind of tale that makes Edmund a saint and East Anglia's end a martyrdom. But historians are sceptical. The earliest account of Edmund's death comes decades later, written by a monk trying to promote Edmund's cult. The details are too perfect, too similar to other martyr stories. What probably happened is simpler and uglier. Edmund was captured, refused to pay tribute or surrender, and was executed. Maybe with arrows, maybe with an axe. The Vikings weren't interested in making martyrs. They just wanted him out of the way. His kingdom was absorbed. East Anglian nobles either fled to Wessex or bent the knee to Viking rule. The royal line ended with Edmund. No heir, no escape, just a dead king and a conquered kingdom. And then the propaganda machine went to work. Edmund became a saint. His shrine at Bury St. Edmund's became one of the richest in England, attracting pilgrims, donations, royal favour. But here's the trick. Making Edmund a martyr meant East Anglia's defeat wasn't a failure. It was a sacrifice, a noble death for the faith. The kingdom didn't lose because it was weak or Edmund made mistakes. It lost because God willed it, because Edmund was too holy to survive in a sinful world. And Wessex, the kingdom that eventually unified England, benefited enormously from this narrative. Edmund the Martyr became part of English history, but East Anglia, the kingdom, was forgotten. It became a region of Wessex, then England, its identity absorbed, its royal bloodline extinct. Archaeologists have searched for Edmund's grave. The shrine at Bury St. Edmund's was destroyed during the Reformation, his bones scattered or lost. In 1848, a skeleton was found that some claimed was Edmund's. DNA testing wasn't available then. Modern experts are skeptical. Edmund's bones are probably gone forever, lost in the chaos of English history. And the Kingdom of East Anglia? It's a footnote, a name on medieval maps. Kids in Norfolk grow up not knowing they live in what was once an independent kingdom. The kings who ruled before Edmund. Their names survive in scattered documents, but nobody knows their stories. East Anglia is dead so thoroughly that even its death is misremembered. But if East Anglia faded into English unity, the kingdom of Asturias took the opposite path. It survived kind of by refusing to be important, by hiding in the mountains, keeping its head down, and slowly, quietly, ceasing to exist as anyone noticed. It starts in 718, just 7 years after the Visigoths collapsed. The Muslim conquest of Spain is nearly complete, but in the far north, in the Asturian mountains, a Visigothic nobleman named Pelayo gathers a few hundred warriors and refuses to submit. The Muslims send a force to crush him. Pelayo retreats into a cave at Covadonga, and when the Muslims follow, Pelayo's men ambush them. It's a small victory, maybe overstated in later chronicles, but it's a victory, and it's the beginning of the Reconquista, the 700-year campaign to retake Spain. The kingdom of Asturias grows slowly. Pelayo's descendants push south, reclaiming territory, building fortresses. But Asturias is poor, mountainous, isolated. The kings rule from tiny capitals, live in stone halls that are barely bigger than farmhouses. They call themselves kings, but they're really warlords, controlling a few valleys and a lot of ambition. And the strangest king of them all is Alfonso II, who rules from 791 to 842. Alfonso is called the Chaste because he never marries, never has children, lives like a monk while wearing a crown. He's devout to the point of obsession, spending more time praying than governing. Under his rule, Asturias doesn't expand. It doesn't conquer. It just survives. And when Alfonso dies without an heir, the kingdom has a succession crisis. His successor is Ramiro I, who maybe, possibly, might be related to Alfonso. The genealogies are murky, but Ramiro takes the throne and immediately has to fight off rebellions. He wins, barely, and rules for 8 years before dying and leaving the throne to his son. And this becomes the pattern. Asturian kings ruling small territories, fending off rebellions, slowly, imperceptibly, becoming less important. Because while Asturias clings to its mountain kingdom, another realm is rising, the Kingdom of Leon. It starts as an Asturian holding, a city the kings use as a secondary capital. But Leon grows, richer, stronger, better positioned. And in 924, the Asturian kings officially move their capital to Leon. They're still called kings of Asturias, technically. But everyone knows the truth. The kingdom has moved. Asturias is a backwater now. Within a generation, Asturias is absorbed. Not conquered, not defeated, just merged into Leon so quietly that the exact moment it happens is debated by historians. Some say 924. Others say it wasn't official until the 11th century. The truth is it doesn't matter, because no one was paying attention. Asturias ceased to be important long before it ceased to exist, and the kings who founded it, who kept Christianity alive in Spain when the Muslims controlled everything else, are forgotten. Pelayo is remembered barely as the guy who started the Reconquista. The kings who came after him, unknown. The Kingdom of Asturias exists in Spanish history as a prologue to Leon, which is itself a prologue to Castile, which becomes part of Spain. It's a dynasty of prologues, kingdoms that only matter because of what came after. And Asturias today, it's a Spanish region, beautiful, mountainous, known for cider and scenery. But the kingdom, gone. No royal tombs to visit, no palaces preserved. The kings are buried in obscure chapels, their graves unmarked or lost. Historians have to piece together Asturian history from fragments, contradictory chronicles, and guesswork. The kingdom existed for 200 years and left almost nothing behind. Just a name, a vague memory of mountain rebels, and a footnote in the story of the Reconquista. But while Asturias faded through irrelevance, The kingdoms of the Alans and Vandals were obliterated through calculated Byzantine vengeance. These are two kingdoms that modern people barely know existed. The Alans and Vandals sound like fantasy tribes, names from a role-playing game, not real historical powers. But they were real, terrifyingly real. And for a brief, shining moment in the 5th century, the Vandals ruled an empire in North Africa that made Rome tremble. Then it all ended in blood, fire, and systematic erasure. The Vandals arrive in North Africa in 429, crossing from Spain under King Genseric. They conquer Carthage, the old Roman city, and turn it into their capital. Genseric is brilliant, ruthless, terrifying. He builds a navy and uses it to raid the Mediterranean, attacking Italy, Sicily, sacking Rome itself in 455. The Vandals become synonymous with destruction, their name evolving into vandalism, meaning senseless destruction. But here's the truth. The Vandals aren't mindless destroyers. They're conquerors building an empire. Genseric rules for 50 years, defeating every Roman army sent against him. When he dies in 4177, the kingdom of the Vandals is at its peak. But Genseric's successors aren't Genseric. They're weaker, less capable. The kingdom starts to fracture. And in 533, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian decides it's time to reconquer North Africa. He sends Belisarius, his best general, with an army. The Vandal king, Gelimer, tries to resist. He fights 2 battles, loses both, and flees into the mountains. Belisarius pursues him relentlessly. For months, Gelimer hides in the Berber hills, starving, abandoned by his nobles. Finally, in 534, he surrenders. Belisarius drags him back to Constantinople in chains. The Vandal kingdom is over, all of it, conquered in less than a year. But Justinian doesn't just conquer, he erases. Vandal lands are redistributed to Byzantine settlers. Vandal nobles are executed or enslaved. Vandal identity is outlawed. Being Vandal becomes dangerous. Within a generation, the Vandal people disappear. Not killed off entirely, but absorbed, scattered, forbidden from identifying as Vandals. The Byzantine authorities are so thorough that by 600, Vandal culture is gone. The language, the laws, the customs, erased. Historians searching for Vandal artifacts find almost nothing. A few coins, some jewelry, that's it. The palaces where Vandal kings ruled in Carthage, demolished or built over. The tombs, looted or lost. And the Alans, the people who allied with the Vandals and shared their fate, they're even more forgotten. The Alans were nomadic warriors from the Caucasus, absorbed into the Vandal migration, living alongside them in North Africa. When the Vandals fell, the Alans fell too, wiped out as a distinct people. Historians struggle even to find references to the Alans after 534. They just vanish from the record. No monuments, no graves, no descendants claiming Alan heritage. It's as if they never existed. And here's the cruelest twist. Justinian is celebrated for his reconquest, for restoring Roman control over North Africa. The destruction of the Vandals is seen as a triumph, a restoration of order. But for the Vandals and Alans, it was genocide. Not in the modern sense of mass murder, though plenty of that happened, but genocide in the sense of destroying a people's identity, forbidding them to exist as themselves. And it worked. The Vandals are remembered today only as destroyers, barbarians, their kingdom a footnote in the story of Rome's decline. The kings who ruled in Carthage, who commanded fleets and defied emperors, are unknown. Genseric is sometimes mentioned. His successors, forgotten. The kingdom of the Vandals and Alans ruled North Africa for over a century. And when it ended, it was erased so completely that even finding proof it existed is difficult. But if the Vandals were erased by conquest, The Khazars were erased by mystery. They're one of history's strangest vanishing acts. A powerful kingdom that controlled the Caucasus, terrorized Byzantium, converted to Judaism, and then disappeared so thoroughly that for centuries historians weren't sure they'd ever existed. Even now, with modern archaeology and genetic studies, the Khazars remain enigmatic, a ghost kingdom, leaving questions instead of answers. The Khazar Khaganate emerges in the 7th century, controlling the region between the Black Sea and the Caspian. They're Turkic nomads originally, but they settle, build cities, control trade routes, and then, sometime in the 8th or 9th century, the Khazar ruling class converts to Judaism. Not Christianity, not Islam, Judaism. In a world where those are the two dominant expanding religions, the Khazars choose the third option. Why? Theories abound. Some historians say it was political, a way to avoid being absorbed by Christian Byzantium or the Muslim Caliphate. Others suggest genuine religious conviction. We don't know. The Khazar sources that would explain it are lost. What we do know is that the Khazar kingdom becomes powerful. They defeat Arab invasions multiple times. They raid Byzantium. They control the Silk Road trade routes, taxing merchants, growing wealthy. And then, slowly, inexplicably, they fade. The Russ's people, Viking settlers moving south from Scandinavia, start conquering Khazar territories. The Byzantines chip away from the west, and by the late 10th century, the Khazar Khaganate is collapsing. By 1016, it's gone, completely. No final battle recorded, no king captured. Just a gradual disappearance from the historical record. The Khazars stop being mentioned in chronicles. Their cities are abandoned or taken over by other peoples, and the kingdom dissolves like morning fog. But here's where it gets weird. The Khazars leave almost nothing behind. There should be ruins, fortresses, cities, tombs filled with Khazar royalty. Archaeologists have searched for decades. They've found some artifacts, coins, pottery, fragments, but no Grand Khazar capital has ever been located. The Khazar language is lost. We have a few words preserved in other languages' texts, but no Khazar documents survive. Nothing written in their language. The conversion to Judaism should have left synagogues, religious texts, Jewish cemeteries. But the evidence is thin, almost non-existent. It's as if the Khazars tried very hard to leave no trace. And that spawned conspiracy theories. Wild ones. Claims that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Khazars, that the kingdom was hidden or mythological, that modern governments are suppressing evidence. Genetic studies have mostly debunked the Khazar-Ashkenazi connection, showing that most Ashkenazi Jews have Middle Eastern ancestry, not Caucasian. But the theories persist because the Khazars are so mysterious, so absent from the physical record, that filling the gaps with speculation is tempting. The truth is probably simpler. The Khazars were a nomadic people who built a kingdom, and then, when that kingdom fell, they scattered, absorbed into neighboring populations, converted to Islam or Christianity, and lost their distinct identity. The Judaism was likely limited to the ruling class anyway. When the Khaganate collapsed, the religion faded with it. But historians hate mysteries, and the Khazars are a massive one. We know they existed. Byzantine sources, Arab chronicles, Russ's records all mention them. They were important, powerful, influential, and then they're gone. No ruins to excavate, no descendants to interview, just silence. It's the perfect historical erasure, except it seems accidental. The Khazars didn't get conquered and deliberately erased like the Saxons. They just stopped existing and left no forwarding address. And that makes them arguably more lost than any other kingdom on this list, because at least with the others, we know what happened. With the Khazars, we're still guessing. But if the Khazars are a mystery, the Avars are an archaeological blank space. They ruled Central Europe for 250 years. They terrorized Byzantium, defeated Frankish armies, controlled a vast territory from the Alps to the Danube, and then Charlemagne destroyed them so completely that historians argue about whether they were real or exaggerated. The Avars are history's most thorough erasure, a people who vanish so totally that even their genetic legacy is debated. The Avars arrive in Europe in the 6th century, fleeing something. The Chinese chronicles mention them, call them a nomadic confederation driven west by other steppe peoples. They show up on the Byzantine border offering to be mercenaries. The Byzantines hire them, use them against other barbarian tribes, and quickly realize they've made a mistake. The Avars are fierce, organized, terrifyingly effective. Within a generation, they've carved out their own territory, a khanate stretching across the Carpathian Basin. They raid Byzantium constantly, demanding tribute, besieging Constantinople more than once. They defeat the Franks, the Slavs, anyone who challenges them. For 2 centuries, the Avar Khaganate is one of the most powerful realms in Europe. Then, in 791, Charlemagne invades. He's already conquered the Lombards, the Saxons. The Avars are next. The war lasts years, not because the Avars are winning, but because their territory is vast and Charlemagne is methodical. He builds fortresses, cuts off trade routes, systematically destroys Avar strongholds. In 796, the Franks capture the Ring, the Avar capital, a massive circular fortress where the Khan stored centuries of plundered treasure. The loot is legendary. Gold, silver, jewels. So much wealth that it takes 15 carts to haul it back to Francia. Charlemagne distributes it across his empire, enriching churches and nobles. And the Avars, broken, their leadership decapitated, their people scattered. But Charlemagne doesn't stop with conquest. He orders the Avar population converted to Christianity forcibly. Avar nobles are executed or absorbed into Frankish nobility. Avar lands are given to Slavic settlers and Frankish vassals. And the Avar people, as a distinct group, begin to disappear. Within a generation, Avar becomes a historical term, not an identity. By 850, the Avar language is extinct. Avar customs, religion, culture, gone. The Avars leave no written records of their own. Everything we know about them comes from Byzantine, Frankish, and Arabic sources, all written by their enemies. And those sources are sparse, often wrong, filled with propaganda. Archaeologically, the Avars are frustrating. There are graves, thousands of them, filled with distinctive Avar artifacts, horse gear, weapons, jewelry. But no major settlements have been found. No palaces, no cities. It's as if the Avars lived in tents and fortifications that rotted away. The Ring, the great capital, its exact location is unknown. Archaeologists have searched the Carpathian Basin for decades. They've found sites that might be the Ring, but nothing conclusive. The greatest Avar stronghold, the center of their power, is lost. And Avar royal burials, unidentified. The Khans who ruled for centuries have no marked graves. We don't even know what the Avar language sounded like. It's completely extinct, leaving no linguistic descendants. A few words survive in place names maybe, but the language itself is gone. And here's the most disturbing part. Genetic studies on Avar remains show that the Avars themselves were genetically diverse, a mix of Central Asian, East Asian, and European ancestry. They weren't a single ethnic group, but a confederation, held together by political and military power. When that power shattered, the confederation dissolved. The people who called themselves Avar either died, fled, or assimilated into Slavic and Germanic populations. Within a century, the Avar identity was extinct, not suppressed, not forbidden, just forgotten. The Avar stopped being Avar and became something else, and the memory of their empire faded so completely that by the Middle Ages, European scholars weren't sure the Avars had ever existed. Some thought they were mythological. It wasn't until modern archaeology that the Avars were proven real. And even now, they remain shadowy, a powerful empire that left almost nothing behind. But while the Avars dissolved into genetic anonymity, the Frisians clung to their identity even as their kingdom died. The Frisians ruled the North Sea coast, controlling trade routes between England, Scandinavia, and the continent. They were merchants and pirates, pagans who resisted Christianity longer than almost anyone in Western Europe. And their last king, Radbod, is remembered for his defiance and the price his people paid for it. Radbod rules in the late 7th century, his kingdom stretching along the coast of what's now the Netherlands. The Frisians are rich from trade, famous for their ships and their ruthlessness. But Radbod is surrounded by Christian kingdoms, the Franks to the south, the Anglo-Saxons across the sea, all pressuring him to convert, threatening war if he doesn't. Radbod resists. He raids Frankish lands, kills missionaries, burns churches. For decades, he holds the line against Christianization. But the pressure is relentless. The Franks, under Charles Martel, invade repeatedly. They don't just want to conquer Frisia. They want to erase its paganism. Radbod dies in 719, still pagan, still defiant. But his death is the beginning of the end. Without him, the Frisian nobility fractures. Some convert to save their lands, others fight on. The Franks crush them systematically. By 734, Frisia is conquered. The Frisian pagans are given a choice. Convert or die. Most convert. Those who don't are executed or driven into exile. Frisian kingship ends. The territory is divided into Frankish counties. Frisian laws are replaced with Frankish ones. The old religion is systematically destroyed. Temples burned, idols smashed, priests killed or converted. And Frisian identity, though it survives in language and culture, loses its political meaning. Frisia becomes a region, not a kingdom. And Radbod, the last pagan king, becomes a villain in Christian chronicles, a stubborn fool who condemned his people to unnecessary suffering by refusing to accept the inevitable. But Frisian oral tradition remembers him differently. As a hero, the king who stood alone against Christianization and fought until the end. The Frisian language survives, barely, evolving into modern Frisian, spoken by a few 100,000 people in the Netherlands and Germany. But the kingdom of Frisia? Forgotten. The kings who ruled before Radbod? Unknown. The royal court, the treasuries, the fortifications? Destroyed or submerged. Much of the Frisian coast has been swallowed by the sea over the centuries. Medieval Frisian cities are underwater now, their ruins occasionally found by divers. The physical evidence of Frisian kingship is literally drowned, and Radbod's grave is lost. No tomb, no monument. He's buried somewhere in Frisian territory, probably near the coast. But where? No one knows. The last pagan king of the Frisians has no marked resting place. Like so many forgotten monarchs, he exists only in chronicles that may be exaggerating, may be wrong, may be propaganda. We know he existed, but everything else is hazy, uncertain, lost to time and tide. And this brings us to the uncomfortable truth about forgotten kings. They're forgotten for a reason. Because the people who conquered them wanted them gone. Because the church rewrote history to favor Christian kings over pagan ones. Because nationalism made inconvenient kingdoms disappear from textbooks. The Merovingians were erased by the Carolingians, the Burgundians by the Franks, the Visigoths by the Muslims and then Christian propagandists, the Saxons by Charlemagne's brutality, the Vandals by Byzantine vengeance, the Khazars by mystery and dissolution, the Avars by total military destruction, the Frisians by Christianization and the sea. Every single one was deliberately or accidentally removed from popular memory, and once they were gone, no one had an incentive to remember them. The winners wrote the history, the losers got footnotes if they were lucky. Usually, they got nothing. Modern historians are slowly recovering these lost kingdoms. Archaeology reveals artifacts. Genetic studies trace bloodlines. Old chronicles are retranslated, reinterpreted. But the damage is done. Most people will live their entire lives never knowing the Merovingians existed. That Burgundy was a kingdom before it was a wine region. That the Visigoths ruled Spain for 3 centuries. That the Saxons fought for their survival and lost. That the Avars terrorized Europe longer than the Mongols. These kingdoms are dead. Their kings are forgotten. And even when we remember them wrong. Reduced to stereotypes, villains, obstacles that heroes overcame. The Merovingians are decadent failures. The Visigoths are weak. The Saxons are pagans who needed civilizing. The Vandals are synonymous with destruction. We've inherited the propaganda, and it's nearly impossible to see past it. But what makes this truly eerie is that it's still happening. Right now, across the world, there are kings and kingdoms fading from memory, bloodlines ending, dynasties collapsing. In 50 years, 100 years, someone will be making a video about the forgotten monarchies of our time. The kingdoms we thought were eternal, now dust. And future viewers will listen, half asleep, and think, how could anyone forget something so important? The same way we forgot the Merovingians. The same way we forgot the Khazars. Power is fragile. Kingdoms fall. Kings die and are forgotten. It's the most consistent pattern in human history, and it never stops. The wheel keeps turning. New kingdoms rise, old ones vanish, and in the end, only the stories survive, if we're lucky, and sometimes not even that. Sometimes there are no stories, just silence. Empty spaces in the historical record where a kingdom should be. Names in dusty chronicles that no one reads. Bones in unmarked graves. Coins that turn up in farmers' fields with inscriptions in dead languages. The forgotten kings are still out there, buried in the earth, waiting. Maybe someone will find them someday. Maybe not. Maybe they'll stay lost forever, erased so completely that even their ghosts are gone. And maybe that's fitting. Power is temporary. Glory fades. Even kings with all their armies and treasures can't escape oblivion. The Merovingians learned it. The Visigoths learned it. The Avars learned it. And someday, inevitably, so will we. So will everyone. That's the dark truth about forgotten kings. They weren't special. They were just people who had power for a while, and then they didn't, and the world moved on without them. As it always does, as it always will. And now, if you found this journey through vanished kingdoms intriguing, go ahead and like the video. Subscribe if you're genuinely interested in more hidden history. And maybe leave a comment about which forgotten kingdom surprised you most. But if you're drifting off now, that's good too. Let the shadows take you. Let the forgotten kings fade into your dreams. They've been waiting in the dark for centuries. Another night won't matter. Sleep well. And remember, we're all just names waiting to be forgotten.